A son cast off his aging mother, but a lonely gunsmith with 4 children took her in, offering not pity, but a place to belong. Casey Rivers stood beside the wagon as her son climbed down with the stiffness of a man carrying too much pride and not enough memory. The hem of her dress caught in the stirrup step, but she didn't lift it. Her hands, weathered and worn, folded over each other like stitched thread too often broken and mended. Toby didn't look at her. "I'll just be a minute," he muttered to the man with the ledger, who waited beneath the dry rot awning of the general store. She watched her son speak in low, clipped tones, the kind he used when buying cattle or selling off unprofitable land. His face was leaner than she remembered, fine city coat, hair slicked back with a vanity he never used to bother with. There was a nervous pinch to his mouth, as though he knew someone might question him. But no one did. They never did when it came to age. Casey took 1 step forward, and the hitching post groaned under her touch. Her shadow, long and thin by twilight, stretched across the dirt street. The town was small, just one main road, boarded shops, a schoolhouse with flaking white paint, and yet in this moment it felt too big to carry her silence. He said she was too old to keep. Someone whispered from inside the bakery. She raised him alone after his daddy died. Another murmured, maybe the miller's wife. Now he's got himself a city girl. No room left for the past. No one came to greet her. They passed, glanced, looked away. Only the dogs lingered. She stood still as stone, her feet burning from the ride, her pride trembling like a weak flame. The sun dipped lower, setting the rooftops aflame with copper. Wind curled around her shoulders, like a shawl she no longer had. When she coughed, she turned her face so no one would see. The ledger man handed Toby a receipt. Money changed hands, quick, clean, and quiet. Casey knew that rhythm. It was how you sold things that didn't fight back. "She's yours to place now," Toby said, loud enough for the nearby folks to hear. "I did what I could, but, well, some burdens don't lighten with time." She flinched at the word. Burden. Not mother. Not Casey. Not the woman who nursed him through fever and hid her hunger to stretch his supper. He walked toward her then, not to say goodbye, but to hand her the small carpet bag with her comb, her brooch, and the last of her dried lilacs from home. His fingers didn't touch hers. "Someone'll take you in. You still got some use in you." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Only a sound, small and dry, like a cupboard door swinging in an empty house. Then he tipped his hat, not to her, but to the crowd, and turned away. His boots clicked clean on the boards. The wagon rolled off. She didn't watch. A soft breath rose behind her. "He really left you." The voice belonged to a girl no older than 10, with thick red braids and a smudge of soot across her nose. She clutched a cloth doll, with one eye missing. Casey met the child's eyes and nodded once. The girl blinked, as if trying to imagine a world where sons left mothers behind. Then, with a solemnity far beyond her years, she reached into her coat and handed over a small butter biscuit wrapped in a napkin. "Mama says old folks know the best stories." Casey took it with trembling hands. "Thank you." The girl skipped off. Behind her, a tall man in a dark leather apron leaned against the doorframe of the gunsmith's workshop. He'd been watching, quiet-like, blue eyes under soot-dark lashes. He didn't call out, didn't move. But when their eyes met, she saw something. Recognition. Not of her face, but of her pain. Casey sat down on a bench no one had offered her, biscuit in hand, the street now nearly empty. She didn't eat. She didn't cry. She only watched the dust settle, like grief finding a place to land. An hour passed. Maybe more. Shadows grew tall. The shop signs creaked with the wind. She began humming. Not a song with words, just a sound her mother once made while kneading bread in a cabin long gone to rot. The door to the forge opened again. The man Jonas, the gunsmith, stepped out with a small bundle under one arm and a toddler curled against his shoulder, fast asleep. "You'll freeze out here," he said. Not unkindly, just matter-of-fact, like someone who knew too well the chill of being forgotten. "I've survived colder things," Casey replied. He nodded, shifting the child. "Still, ain't no shame in coming in for stew. Got some left." Not fresh, but warm. She said nothing. Not asking for payment, he added. Just figured you might like a roof for the night. Casey looked toward the direction her son had gone, but it was only empty sky now. No carriage wheels. No tracks. No voice calling back. She rose slow, the biscuit still clutched in one hand. Inside the smithy, the air was thick with iron and smoke, and something softer, like rosemary steeped in broth. For children played in a corner with wood blocks and string. The eldest, a boy with hair like dust and hands already calloused, looked up sharply. "She don't look like a housemaid," he said. "She's not," Jonas said. "She's hungry." That was all. The children stared at her with open suspicion, except for the smallest, barely 3, who toddled toward Casey and tugged the hem of her dress. "You got cookies?" she asked. Casey smiled then. "Just barely. Only stories." The child looked disappointed, but leaned into her anyway. Within minutes, she was nestled on Casey's lap, half asleep. Jonas ladled stew into a tin bowl and placed it before her. She ate slowly, as if memorizing each flavor. Salt, beef, parsnip, memory. "They say he sold you," the eldest boy said. His voice held no cruelty, only curiosity. Casey wiped her mouth and met his gaze. "No, he gave me away. Selling implies someone wanted me." The boy said nothing, but Jonas looked up. "That's not true," he said simply. "Sometimes folks don't see what's worth holding until someone else does." The fire popped. Outside, a coyote cried in the hills. Casey looked down at her hands. They were strong still, scarred, veined, but steady. She hadn't noticed how tightly she'd been clenching her brooch, her husband's, long since gone cold against her breast. "You got a name, miss?" one of the girls asked. "Casey." The children repeated it like a song. She sat by the fire until the others went to bed. The forge hummed in the next room. Jonas sat sharpening a blade, careful and slow. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was respectful. She leaned back, for the first time in days, her shoulders uncurled. "Why'd you take me in?" she asked, quiet. He paused, considering. "Because no one should be left out in the dark when there's still warmth to spare." She nodded once, the ache in her chest not gone, but softer now, like a wound starting to scab. The front door creaked. A pair of boots stepped inside. The sheriff, broad, silver-haired, watchful, tipped his hat. "Evening, Jonas." "Ma'am." Jonas didn't look up. "Evening, Sheriff." The sheriff's gaze settled on Casey. His mustache twitched. "Heard she was left. Folks talking to—" Jonas shrugged. "Let him." The sheriff glanced at the child asleep in Casey's lap, then back at Jonas. "You sure about this?" Jonas's eyes finally met his. "I got 4 children. I'm sure about her." The sheriff grunted. "Well, town's watching. Careful who you take in, these days." He left without another word. Casey looked toward Jonas. His jaw was set, eyes still on the blade. The room held its breath. She rose slowly, placed the child gently in the cradle by the hearth. Then she turned to the forge wall, where shelf held tools, oil, and a long-forgotten photograph of a woman holding a baby. Casey traced her finger near it, not touching. Jonas spoke without turning. "That was my wife. Died birthing our last." Casey nodded. "I won't replace her." "I'm not asking you to." She looked back once more at the door, the night pressing against it like a memory not yet gone. Then she whispered, "But I'll stay, if that's all right." Jonas didn't answer right away, but when he did, it was with a voice that didn't flinch. "You already have." Outside, a lantern flickered in the wind, and down the road, unseen by them both, Toby Rivers paused in his carriage, watching the light in the forge, the woman beside it, and the man who had noticed what he discarded. But he did not turn back. He never would. The sun rose low and slow the next morning, casting long shafts of golden light through the slatted windows of the smithy's side room. Casey awoke with a thin blanket across her knees, and the scent of ash, metal, and milk-heavy porridge drifting in from the kitchen. For a moment, she thought she was back on her husband's ranch, years before her son's eyes had turned toward wealth and away from her. but the sound of iron striking iron brought her back, the sharp, rhythmic clang echoing through wood and bone like a heartbeat. She dressed without a mirror, tying her gray braid with a thin piece of string. Her hands moved with habitual grace. No rush, no vanity, just a quiet kind of order, the kind women like her were made from. In the main room, Jonas stood with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms blackened with soot. Sparks lit the shadows around him. The forge hissed like a sleeping beast. His hammer rose, fell, and rose again, shaping some piece of metal that glowed orange at its core. There was something sacred in it, like watching a preacher wrestle the word into shape. Casey didn't speak. She poured water from the pump, lit the stove for tea, and began slicing bread without being asked. She had not earned her place with words, and she knew better than to try. Usefulness was a language men respected more than gratitude. The eldest boy, Sam, wandered in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He paused when he saw her. "You still here?" Casey didn't turn. "Sun's up, isn't it?" He studied her a moment longer, then nodded as if that made sense. She handed him a bowl. He took it wordlessly. Ruthie entered next, hair tangled and cheeks flushed from sleep. Her eyes flicked from Casey to the butter tin, then back again. "Papa says we don't waste," she mumbled. Casey handed her a spoon. "Nothing's wasted if it finds a mouth to feed." Ruthie blinked, then sat beside her brother, close enough to matter. As the morning passed, Casey cleaned the hearth, swept the front steps, and trimmed the dead lavender by the windowsill. The toddler, Elsie, clung to her skirt more than once, hands sticky with jam and wonder. Jed, the quiet middle boy, followed at a distance, arms crossed like a gate. She didn't push. She simply moved as if she belonged there. At midday, Jonas returned to the house, wiping sweat from his neck with a rag. "You don't have to do all that," he said, nodding at the washbasin she was scrubbing. She shrugged. "You gave me warmth. I return it in kind." He hesitated, then handed her a tin cup of cool water. She took it without fuss. Their hands didn't touch, but the space between them warmed. A breeze picked up. Outside, the wind chimes strummed with spent casings began to sing. Later that afternoon, Casey sat on the porch mending a rip in Jonas's work shirt. The children played in the dust, drawing imaginary trails with sticks. A wagon passed by, the driver peering too long at her. "That's her," she heard a woman whisper from the back. "The one left like a sack of flour." "She's got Jonas's children now," another voice said. "Maybe she's working her way into a marriage." Ruthie looked up. "What's that mean?" Casey didn't flinch. "Nothing worth knowing, child." But her hands trembled just enough to stitch crooked. That evening, as the sun began to lean westward and the air cooled with pine, Jonas handed her a small tin of coffee. "It's fresh," he said. "Traded for it this morning." She looked at the tin, then at him. "Why?" "Because you boiled what little I had yesterday with such care I thought I was drinking a memory." Casey smiled, faint but real. "It was your cup. I just borrowed it." "No," he said, voice quiet. "You gave it flavor." She held the tin against her chest, like something fragile. "I haven't been given anything in a long while that wasn't meant to shut me up." "You earned it, just by being here." The next day brought rain. A soft drizzle at first, then a steady downpour that painted the world in silver gray. The forge steamed with each strike of metal. Casey pulled a shawl over Elsie's shoulders and taught Ruthie how to sew a hem that wouldn't unravel in the wash. Sam watched from the stairs, scribbling something in a battered notebook. "Papa says you used to live on a ranch," he said. "I did." "Was it big?" "Big enough to feel alone in." "Do you miss it?" Casey didn't answer right away. She folded the hem, smoothed the cloth, and finally said, "I miss the part of myself I was allowed to be there." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. In the evening, they all sat by the fire, Jonas sharpening tools, Casey darning socks, the children curled up around their own small labors and dreams. "You know how to shoot?" Sam asked. "I do. Papa says he won't teach Ruthie. Says it ain't proper." Casey chuckled. "Your father's kind. But kindness and bullets don't often meet. I can teach her, if she wants." Jonas raised his brow. That's so. Casey met his eyes. You've seen what's out there. Townfolk, too. She should know how to aim, if only to walk straighter. He thought for a long time, then nodded. You teach her, but not with my revolver. I'll build her a new one. Casey's throat tightened. That's no small gift. It's not a gift, he said. It's an acknowledgement. She nodded, blinking slow, as if that sentence had touched something buried deep. In the days that followed, Casey stitched new shirts from scraps, mended Jonas's bootlaces, taught Ruthie to read recipes, and taught Jed to scrub properly behind the ears. The children began calling her Miss Casey, though Elsie simply called her Ma. She didn't correct her, but not all hearts soften with time. At the mercantile, Irene Dalton crossed her arms and sneered. So this is what you've come to, trading Son for Smith. Casey held her gaze. He didn't trade. He threw me out like cinders. The Smith opened his door. Irene snorted. Pity doesn't keep a roof over your head. No, Casey said, but Grace does. She left with her chin high and groceries paid for mending clothes for a neighbor. That evening, Jonas returned from the edge of town with a new bruise on his jaw. The sheriff had stopped him. People talk, he muttered, as though I took you in for what no man should. Casey iced the bruise without comment. Later she whispered, You don't owe me anything, Jonas. I know, he replied, but I owe my children someone who doesn't leave when things get hard. That night, she sang the children to sleep with a song her mother used to hum, a hymn no one remembered the words to anymore, just the tune. Jonas stood by the doorway, arms crossed, listening like a man who'd found water in the desert. At dawn, she found a small box beside her plate. Inside, a thimble made of silver. Engraved initials, CR. She looked up to see Jonas watching from the forge, hammer still in hand. I thought your hands deserved better, he said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. That afternoon, a rider arrived. Toby Rivers, her son. He rode in with dust on his boots and a frown carved deep into his brow. Dismounted like a man expecting trouble. Saw her through the open window. Apron tied, flour on her hands, laughter in the room. He didn't speak. Just turned his horse and left. Casey stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding, flour still on her palms. The children ran to her, asking what was wrong. Nothing, she said. Not anymore. But her eyes didn't leave the trail for a long time. And from the corner of the forge, Jonas watched too, quietly setting down the revolver frame he'd been shaping, the one meant for Ruthie. He looked at Casey, really looked, and something deep and unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not rescue, recognition, and maybe, just maybe, beginning. The weeks slid by like thread through cloth, quiet, steady, unnoticed by those not watching close. In the forge, the sound of iron against anvil beat like a second clock, and in the home behind it, Casey stitched herself slowly into the rhythm of that life. Not as a guest, not even as a help, but as something older and deeper than title, a presence, a keeper of warmth, a stitch where something had torn. Yet even as Jonas and the children accepted her with gestures, a warm cup, a nap on her lap, a rifle barrel left on the table with a wordless nod, the town did not. Shame trailed her like a second shadow, and gossip in places like these didn't die. It changed faces. At the seamstress's shop, Casey waited in line with a small bundle of Ruthie's mended petticoats. The bell jingled overhead as Irene Dalton turned from her counter, eyes already narrowed. Well, she drawled, slow and sharp as a cold blade. Didn't think I'd see you back in town so soon. Thought maybe Jonas had tucked you away behind that forge for good. Casey placed the bundle down, careful not to show how her hands tightened. I'm here for thread, not opinion, she said. Oh, honey. Irene smiled, all teeth. At your age, they're the same thing. Other women tittered. The moment hung like smoke in a room too small. Casey didn't flinch. Funny how I've never once cared for the opinion of a woman who's never raised a child past the age of her own vanity. Silence. Then a hiss of breath, quick and vicious. She left the shop with thread, but the sting clung like vinegar on skin. That evening, Jonas found her outside under the porch awning, rubbing linseed oil into his leather apron, though it didn't need it. Her motions were tight, distracted. "You okay?" She shrugged, eyes still on her hands. "Town still has its knives. Just quieter now. Gossip's like rust. It spreads faster when you don't scrub it." He leaned against the rail beside her, arms folded. "They'll forget. In time." "No," she said. "They won't. But I'll learn not to care." The children inside played with spoons and marbles and made-believe. A fire cracked in the hearth. Baby Elsie cried for someone to hold her, and Casey didn't hesitate. That was the difference. The town may have doubted her, but these children, these wild, scarred little hearts, they did not. She began teaching Ruthie how to cook without burning the bottom of the pan. Sam asked her about books. Jed brought her broken toys and sat with folded arms until she fixed them. It was slow work, but real. The kind that left you marked, but warm. One night, a storm tore across the hills, fierce and sudden. Thunder cracked the sky open like bone. Casey ushered the children to the cellar, held them close as wind howled through the rafters. Jonas returned near midnight, soaked and bruised from pulling a neighbor's wagon from a flooded ravine. When he stumbled through the door, Casey met him at the threshold. He didn't speak, just handed her his coat, and nearly collapsed. "You're a fool," she whispered, toweling his hair. "A damn kind fool." His lips twitched. "Guilty." She fed him broth by firelight, and when he winced from a pulled muscle, her hands, steady and knowing, found the ache without needing direction. They didn't speak of it, but something shifted then. Not romance, not longing, but a recognition. A kind of shared tiredness that no longer needed explaining. In town, though, the storm only stirred other things. The sheriff came by 2 days later, tapping the door with the side of his boot. "Mind if I speak plain?" he asked once Jonas let him in. "You always do," Jonas muttered. The sheriff nodded toward the back room, where Casey was mending Jed's boots. "Woman's been stirring talk." "Irene Dalton stirs talk," Jonas replied. Sheriff grunted. "Difference is, folks listen when it's about blood. That boy of hers, Toby, he's back. Brought a preacher this time." Casey looked up from her stitching. "A preacher. Claims he wants to make things right. Says you're still his mother." Casey's mouth pressed into a line. "Is he offering apology or ownership?" The sheriff shrugged. "I reckon he don't know the difference." She stood slowly, brushing off her lap. He never did. That evening, Jonas watched her from across the kitchen. She moved differently, more guarded, like someone waiting for a knock she wouldn't answer. "Do you want to see him?" he asked. "No." "You sure?" "I buried that boy when he sold me," she said, "and I've no interest in digging up the bones." Still, the following Sunday, Toby stood in church, new boots, new suit, and a pious look he hadn't earned. He asked the preacher to pray for all those led astray from blood, and some turned to look at Casey, though she sat in the back with the children, eyes lowered. She didn't speak a word on the ride home, but that night, she took the picture of her late husband from her bag and placed it on the mantel. The forge remained busy through the week. Jonas's orders grew. A new family moved in. A birth was announced. The town lived on. And Casey began to sew more deliberately. Her stitches became neater, purposeful. Not just fixing what was broken, but creating. One morning, Ruthie came to her with a torn ribbon. "Can you fix it?" "I can make it better," Casey said. That same day, Jonas came home with an old spinning wheel someone had left by the road. "Thought you might want it," he said. Casey stared at the battered frame, and something inside her cracked. "I used to have one," she whispered, "back before my hands were just for washing and waiting." She spent days restoring it, oilcloth polish. The children watched her work, marveling as the wheel turned smooth again. Sam asked what it was for. "To make thread," she said, "from what's left behind." One morning, Irene passed by the porch and saw Casey spinning wool. "Thought you'd be ashamed, after all your fine years. Reduced to servant's work." Casey met her eyes, calm as a still pond. "I turned shame into thread. You just wear yours like perfume." Irene didn't return. Jonah smiled at that, quiet and small. "You're dangerous with words." Casey looked back at the wheel. Only when I believe them. On a rare day off, Jonas handed her a wrapped bundle. Inside was a thick, worn book, the Prairie Woman's Almanac. He cleared his throat. Belonged to my mother. Figured you'd do better with it. She opened to a page on herbal tonics, then another on dyeing fabric. Her fingers brushed the yellowed paper as if greeting an old friend. "Thank you," she said. "You're part of this house now," he replied. It was not a proposal, but it was more than permission. Later that week, a boy from town tossed mud at Ruthie as she walked to the well. "Your grandma's a beggar," he shouted. "She got dumped like spoiled milk." Ruthie burst into tears and ran home. Casey held her for a long while. Then, with careful hands, she packed a basket with baked bread, a note, and one of Ruthie's favorite ribbons. She sent Sam to deliver it to the boy's house. "But why?" he asked. "They were mean." Casey kissed his forehead. "Sometimes you teach people kindness, not because they deserve it, but because you do." Jonas found her outside that evening, hands dirty from the garden, face streaked with dust. "You didn't have to do that." "No," she said, "but I remember what it felt like to be hated loud and loved quiet. I won't pass that on." He stood beside her in silence, the dusk painting their shadows long and soft. "She called you Grandma today," Jonas said after a moment. "Elsie." Casey's breath caught. "Did she mean it? She doesn't know another word for what you are to her." Casey turned her face to the wind, blinking hard. She didn't reply. But that night, she took out the thimble Jonas had given her and stitched a name onto the inside of a baby blanket she'd been making. "Elsie," in blue thread, soft and strong. The next morning, a letter arrived, neatly folded, sealed in wax. From Toby. She didn't open it. She burned it behind the forge, watched the flame consume every word he had not spoken aloud. Then she returned to the porch, poured 2 cups of coffee, and handed one to Jonas. The warmth of the cup was real. So was the peace between them. But in the distance, on the road to town, a black carriage rolled in from the north. And this time, it wasn't Toby inside. The black carriage pulled into town just after sunrise, its wheels moving like a sermon, slow, deliberate, and heavy with things not said. It parked not by the church or the mercantile, but directly in front of the gunsmith's forge, casting its shadow across the porch steps. Casey had just finished sweeping. She didn't stop moving. She finished her stroke, tapped the broom against the rail, and looked up only when the door opened. Toby stepped out first, dressed in finer cloth than this town had ever seen him wear. Dark blue coat, polished boots, gloves he didn't remove even when the morning heat began to rise. Behind him, a preacher with spectacles and an uneasy gait climbed out, holding a ledger close to his chest. Jonas stood beside the forge with soot on his brow, hammer in one hand, expression unreadable. Toby walked forward like a man who believed the road had always belonged to him. "I came to take her home," he said. Casey looked at the preacher, then at her son. She said nothing. Toby smiled as if her silence proved something. "I brought a man of the cloth. And papers, if you need 'em. She's still my mother. Legally. She's not livestock," Jonas said. Toby ignored him. "She's not well. You don't see it, but I do. Look at her. This isn't what she was raised for." Casey set the broom down with care. "I wasn't raised for abandonment either." The preacher shifted nervously. "Perhaps we should sit down." "No," she said, voice quiet. "There's no need to sit when the matter's been standing in plain sight." Toby's tone sharpened. "I'm offering her dignity." "You're dressing shame in Sunday clothes," she said. That stopped him. Casey stepped down from the porch. Her shawl was thin, her braids silvered at the edges, her hands lined with proof that life had not been soft. But she stood straighter than she had in years. "I built you from scraps," she said to him. "From biscuits stretched thin, from nights I didn't sleep, from prayers I whispered over your fevered head. And when I wore out, you threw me to the wind like dandelion fluff. Now you want to gather me back, so I don't shame your image." "You're twisting this," Toby snapped. "I've brought witnesses. I've brought a man of faith." Casey turned to the preacher. "And what would your God think of a son who sells a mother and calls it mercy?" The man stammered, words catching on conscience. I'm only here to facilitate. Jonas stepped forward. His arms were crossed, but his voice carried like a drawn rifle. She's part of this house. She keeps it together more than I do. You want to take her? You'd best bring more than papers and Sunday talk. Toby's hands clenched. This is a public insult. It's a public truth, Casey said, and I've lived too long not to claim it. A small crowd had gathered by now, whispers crawling across the street, like smoke. Irene stood with folded arms. The sheriff leaned against a post, chewing a toothpick but not interfering. Ruthie ran from the porch, wide-eyed. Is he taking you? Casey knelt and cupped the girl's face. No one takes what is freely given, and I was never given. I was claimed. Jonas placed a hand on Ruthie's shoulder. Go inside, sweetheart. Toby stepped closer, tone darkening. You really want to stay here? With children that aren't yours? In a house built for metal and soot? Casey stood. Her eyes no longer trembled. I'd rather sit at a table with crumbs and love than dine with ghosts in a house full of mirrors. The preacher said nothing. Toby's breath quickened. You're old. You're forgetting what family means. She shook her head. No, Toby. I'm remembering. The sheriff finally spoke. If she ain't leaving by her own word, there's not a lawman in this town that'll force her. Toby turned on his heel, furious, his boot heels cutting the dust. She'll regret this. Casey watched him go without flinching. Son, she called gently. He paused. Shame didn't kill me, but it changed me. You won't like the woman I'm becoming. He didn't turn back. The preacher climbed in after him, eyes flicking down in what might have been apology. The carriage rolled off. When the dust settled, the town stood quiet. Jonas turned to Casey. You all right? She nodded once. I've been on my knees for too long. Standing feels good. Inside the house, the children huddled by the window. Casey walked in and knelt before them. I'm not going anywhere, she said. But I need you to know something. Love isn't born from blood. It's born from showing up, from staying, from wiping tears and stitching what's torn. They nodded, small heads bobbing like wheat. That night, the town's silence gave way to something else. Women came by with pies, with jars of preserves, with thread and folded linens. Not apologies, just gestures. The kind of gestures Casey understood. I never said I was wrong, Irene whispered as she handed over a fresh bolt of fabric. You didn't need to, Casey replied. Your feet brought you. Under the stars, Jonas brought out a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal 2 rings, simple, unpolished, forged by hand. I ain't asking for a wedding, he said, voice low. I'm offering a place, a name, if you want it. Casey's breath caught. You already gave me what I thought was gone, she said. A reason to make biscuits in the morning. He smiled. That's enough then. She didn't take the ring yet, but her hand rested on the box like she might. Later, as the house quieted and the fire dimmed to embers, she stood at the window. The stars above were wide and clear, not crowded like they used to be. She turned the silver thimble in her hand, the one Jonas had gifted her weeks ago, and whispered, I was discarded once. Her voice trembled, just slightly, but now I am chosen. Then she looked to the door as if sensing something still unfinished, because Toby had left, but his wife hadn't.